camera's on, you can give me a thumbs up that I'm being heard okay? All right, great, thanks. Okay, so it's a great pleasure this morning for me, afternoon or evening for many of you, to welcome Gideon Kruseman. He's going to talk to us about research ethics, research ethics compliance for breeding programs. And I think all of us in CIMMYT, in most of our work, have research that implies needs for research compliance. Or ethics compliance, as we're going to find out this morning or this evening from Gideon. I also want to take this opportunity, and I'll do this again at the end of the seminar, but first of all, to thank Gideon for several years of really getting this CIMMYT's Research Ethics Committee started and up and running and now completely functional, something that really wasn't on the radar of CIMMYT when Gideon took on this task. And is really, as you're going to learn very much, Gideon, as probably all of you know, Gideon will be leaving CIMMYT at the end of this year and taking on other tasks still within the CG starting from January. I also want to take the opportunity to let everyone know that Aparna Das has agreed to take on the role of chairing CIMMYT's IREC committee. So I want to thank Aparna very much. It's not a thankless job because I'm very thankful that you do this, but I know it's a lot of work, but it's very important to CIMMYT. So thank you, Aparna, and thank you, Gideon. And I think now we have a very nice quorum of about 27 colleagues online. So let me hand over to you, Gideon. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. Other scientists on focus will be on the breeding programs. Not that it doesn't contain very useful information for other scientists, because it does, and because in general it doesn't really matter what type of research you do. If it involves people, and that is the main focus that I will be addressing, you basically need to follow the same types of procedures. What I will do, however, is focus examples, etc., on the breeding programs. So without further ado, let me get started on the presentation. So first of all, what am I going to what are we going to talk about? First, I'm going to provide a bit of
I don't know
context.
if you're trying to show us some slides, but we don't see any slides.
Oh, I'm very sorry. Let me quickly. Let me do this. Share the screen. Where's no, hold on a second. There we go. Yeah. Share. Yeah. Let me know if you much missed there. Okay, so the overview of of my presentation. I'll provide a bit of context, then talk about what you need to do and what you need to consider in the process. So a main portion is going to be the context. So there have been already other webcasts on this topic. If you haven't seen them already, this is they're on the CIMMYT webcast page. So why are we doing this? Why should you worry about research ethics compliance? First of all, because it's part of CIMMYT's policy. CIMMYT has an ethics and research policy governing the IREC since 2016. It was updated in 2019 to address some of the issues that arose in the previous period. This policy is it's robust now, and it governs the whole process. So you can find this on our policy pages. But it's not just CIMMYT. The whole within the CGIAR, there is a research and ethics code. This one was updated in 2020. In late 2020, and this one is the one that governs research ethics within the whole one CGIAR setting. It lays out the foundations. This policy lays out the foundations across the systems. It covers a bit more topics than research ethics alone. Ethics that we consider at CIMMYT, because it also covers issues on ethical relationships with other people within the research process, etc., which is part of a different set of policies in the code of conduct kind of thing within the context of CIMMYT. But it's not just the CGIAR. It's part of a wider with the Belmont report a couple decades ago, which really laid down the foundations for an ethical ways of doing research. Initially, this was very much focused on health-related research, because that's where there were major risks and ethical considerations with regard to participants in medical research studies, and that needed to be taken into consideration. But over time, this has evolved to start to cover after the medical and biomedical research, the social sciences, especially where it involved vulnerable groups, then all people, very much related to this, which is about animals. So the research ethics of doing animal-related research. But as we do not do very much animal-related research, where we're doing experiments that involve animals, I'm not going to touch upon that. But you can imagine that very much the similar types of issues come into play. So besides these kind of things, there is also the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, to which many of the countries in which we operate are signatories. So these countries, this Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples actually stipulates that the signatory countries need to put it into their own legislation, because these kind of things are very much context specific, but it does lay out the kind of foundational aspects of what you need to take into consideration. Many of the countries where we operate have not put it into national legislation. So the basic foundations of the United Nations Declaration is what you always need to take into account. Now, another really important aspect for science from or about or with human subjects, and over the past 4 years, I've seen this evolving into being more and more strict. So it is something that if you want to continue to publish, it's really important to get your policy, its national legislation requirements of individual countries, its international treaties, its international best practices, and its journal requirements. So there's a whole range of issues, both individually and taken together, which mean that it's a really good idea to get your research approved by IRA. So who needs to ensure that the research go through ethics review? Typical research at CIMMYT that involve interviews with people. So surveys, key informant interviews, focus group discussions, market studies, when you're talking to people for a research purpose, then you need to get ethics approval. But it also on-farm trials, because you're working together with the farmers on their fields, or you're using a portion of their fields for these trials, and this has ethics implications. Now, there are the vast majority of research that takes place at CIMMYT is relatively low risk, and so the processes can be quite rapid. However, there are a few cases where this is not the case, where a little bit more elaborate review is needed, and this is especially when there are risks involved. And in the case of on-farm trials, this is where there is the use of machinery or the use of hazardous chemicals, because that poses a health risk to the participant. Other things that you may not be aware of, but do require, is when you're doing participatory variety selection, that involves people. You're talking with local communities, identifying what traits they need. At that point, you need to get ethics review. It's a light review because it's very low risk, and there are just a few things that you need to take into consideration, which are in the process. You're asking people their opinions about certain things. You're doing research. You need to get approval. Again, it's usually very low risk, so the procedures for getting your approval are rapid. Taking pictures of people also has ethics considerations because of the privacy implications. So you need to get prior informed consent, and that is part of the process. There are certain types of research that always need approval because they pose more than minimal risk. So, as I said before, research activities involving health and nutrition, and because of the health implications that involve, and as soon as there is some level of deception involved in the research, agro-dealer shops, and you use that information to derive certain conclusions. When there is deception involved, this type of deception involved, or when there is no prior informed consent collected because of the research, the way that the research is organized, and there is no way that you can ask the prior informed consent, then there is a more strenuous review process in place. So one of the key elements of when you need to get ethics review and approval is when you're collecting personally identifiable information. So personally identifiable information is things like names, telephone numbers, addresses. This is what we call direct personally identifiable information, or direct PII. This kind of information is very often collected because it makes sense to collect them because you're doing research that requires revisiting the same household a number of times, being able to go back to the fields where you're doing an on-farm trial, etc. That means that as soon as you do that, you need to take to manage that that data very, very carefully, because it is privacy sensitive. But it's not just a direct PII, but it's also what we call indirect PII. Indirect PII is data sources could lead to the re-identification of a household. So you can imagine, for instance, in socioeconomic surveys, very often you collect a detailed household roster, which is basically, who's part of this this household, what is their sex, what is their age, what is their level of education, etc. And so there is this kind of information, just those couple of variables already. If you have context-related information, for instance, that village, then if you see that data, the anonymity is diminished, even if there is no names attached to it. And it's not just if someone knows the village because they come there, but even anonymously, someone could scrape the internet, social media, Facebook, and identify, okay, yep, we can re-identify this household. So these kind of things are mean that you need to deal with them in a very careful way. You can collect it, but you cannot make it public. The same is with granular geospatial information. Collecting granular geospatial information of fields is fine, but it cannot be published. So as soon as you are collecting granular geospatial information, then it is subject to ethics review, because the ethics review looks at how is that data handled, how is that data managed. Different countries have different laws, rules, and regulations governing human research. They have different laws and rules regulating privacy and data confidentiality, and they have and different funders have specific requirements related to research ethics, which are part of contracts related to projects. Now, if we go back to the granular geospatial location, that is an example of where that plays a role. So where many countries do not have rules and regulations around that, so it basically falls under the bar that we set as what is good practice in terms of this kind of information. There are countries where it is very highly rated. An example is Mexico, where any data that is granular, that is granular geospatial harmless falls under data privacy laws. And so it becomes, you cannot, granular geospatial information that is linked to the property or the fields used by farmers cannot be made public in any way. So how can a PI get his or her research activities reviewed and approved by IRA? Because I'm sure that a lot of you, when you're listening to this, say, "Oh, well, I'm doing stuff that falls under the things that Gideon just mentioned." So the key elements of ethics ethics review is prior informed consent. People have to say yes, they want to be part of the research process. There has to be a positive balance between discomforts and benefits. So if you're doing relatively low risk research that doesn't require a lot of effort from the participants or time investment, then the kind of benefits that you're asking farmers to put in time and effort in terms of, let's say, variety selection or an on-farm trial, or spending hours with an enumerator filling in a survey form, then yeah, definitely there has to be that balance. Has to be there, and so that's a really important aspect. Another one which is really important, and I've mentioned it before, is managing any risks. And so the example of mechanization in an on-farm trial. So there is an on-farm trial going on to look at if new varieties work well with conservation agriculture, which includes, let's say, mechanized seeder. If farmers are not aware, do not have much experience with that type of machine prior to doing the research, that has to be written down in a protocol so that the IREC can see whether these risks are mitigated sufficiently. And one which is really important for everyone to take into consideration is the responsible data management, especially related to personally identifiable information. So the direct person, as well as indirect PII and granular geospatial information. So what do you need to do to apply for approval is you need to submit your research to IREC, and that goes with a cover sheet with key administrative information, a research protocol which lays out, why are you doing the research, what will you be doing, where is it taking place, who's doing the research, what is the prior informed consent procedure that is in that's a lot of work. But in fact, it's the kind of information that when you're designing your research in the first place, you've written it down somewhere. So it's a question of doing some copying and pasting, perhaps rewriting little bits and pieces, placing it in context, etc., especially if you're doing copying and pasting of small bits and pieces out of larger documents, then that will, but in fact, you're not doing anything that you haven't. It is all doable. And that is the prior informed consent, the consent procedure. You may not have thought, I need to ask people. So that may be something that is new and that you need to add, but you need to add it anyway, because for all research involving people, you need to have that in place. How can you do this? Well, we have a whole bunch of resources available in order to ease your life. We have forms to get to fill in a lot of the information that is required for certain types of research. We have specific forms like on-farm for on-farm. So it's really we have at CIMMYT an institutional subscription to the city ethics training program, and you can just log in there and take ethics training. While it is mandatory if you're doing human subjects and human subjects related research, for non-social scientists in this respect. Training program is very much geared towards social science in high-income countries settings. So it's a little bit further away from the practicalities of research in low and lower middle income countries, and certainly away from field research that a lot of us do within the CGIAR, especially if you're not a social scientist. So we do encourage people to take that training. It's useful. You need to look beyond the examples that are provided in the training, and see, okay, well, and do a little bit of brain gymnastics to see, okay, yeah, and what does that mean for me when I'm doing an on-farm trial in Zimbabwe, or participatory variety selection in Chiapas, or all these kind of different things. So further resources that we have, Research Ethics Committee, a lot of information there. You can always send an email to IREC. We have our own email address, or you can contact the chair, which as of January, earlier during the meeting. So that basically concludes the presentation that I prepared. So I would like to really turn it over to Q&A.
Yeah, I don't see. Raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. In the meantime, I can start out. I can kick us warm things up with one quick question. So I thought you said that the evaluation, IREC evaluation, but what if the survey is just for information gathering, and you're not going to actually conduct research based on the findings? So you're asking for expert opinion, information, knowledge, wisdom, basically to sort of set the scene for where things are today, and not because you're going to go out and then decide what to do and start doing research.
Yeah, good point. Okay, for some of this kind of scoping, it's okay. There is no need, but for some of it, it is. So as soon as you're actually recording people's names, and then it does fall under the it needs to be cleared. So the answer that I would give is who have come to us is better be safe than sorry. Just submit it. If it is something that actually it can be is okay to go ahead straight away, it gets it gets what we call an exempt approval. And exempt approval sounds like, okay, you shouldn't have brought it. An exempt approval actually is the kind of approval that you also need for for a lot of other things as well. So, for instance, if you're collecting, let's say, marketing information. So you go out to rural markets where seeds are being sold, and you're stopping passersby, asking them, have they bought maize seeds? And then ask them, well, what kind of seeds, blah, blah, blah. And you're just asking some really light questions, nothing problematic, and you're not asking any personally identifiable information, their names or anything else. You may be collecting granular geospatial information, but that's of the market. Now that's public. So that doesn't fall under the issues around geospatial location. And so this is a type of research that it's low risk. You're not collecting any PII, and as long as you're identifying yourself and you're saying what you're doing, and you're asking the people if it's okay if they want to answer a few questions, which you would be doing anyway. Otherwise, you have to introduce yourself at some point. And so a very light prior informed consent, then yeah, this is the type of research that gets exactly.
So I think, yeah, the answer is pretty clear to me. If there's any doubt, just ask the committee, and it'll probably be simple. Okay, we've got now a couple of questions. There's one in the chat that showed up before the hand was raised, from Mainasara. So thanks, Gideon, for the informative presentation. Why can't we have automatic renewal for activities like on-farm testing with exactly the same protocol, or even have a multi-year approval?
Actually do have an almost automatic renewal for these types of activities. So we have a form for the renewal of your of this type of research, where it asks, are you using exactly the same? Is there any change in the protocol? So if you're doing exactly the same thing but only in another year, then it will be automatic if there were no issues with the initial approval. Then why can it not be multi-year? Well, that is because international standards say that a research ethics approval is valid for trials. Do it once, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. But we can do, we do it once. We do the review. On-farm trials in general can be reviewed very quickly. Now, all you need to do is that put it in your agenda. 2 weeks before the new season starts. Submit to IREC the continuance review of the on-farm trials.
Okay, that's quite clear. Now, Abdu had his hand up, but it's back down. So, Abdu, did you get your answer, or do you want to still ask a question?
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I was just waiting. Thank you so much, Kevin. So thank you, Gideon. My question is, it's very, very relevant discussion going on. So thank you again, Gideon, because you are really touching some of the important points. So you really mentioned the criteria from the request from the donor versus our standards with CIMMYT. So where is the balance we can make? For example, we are being asked to give PII to the extent that ethnic group, religion, and to that extent, we need to feel those beneficiaries. And that is probably the request from the donor. And what is our CIMMYT standards? That is one of the things.
Yeah.
Also, Gideon, also, ODK. Pretty much people in CIMMYT, we use ODK. And in ODK, you have all the GPS, every information, and the server is not necessarily with CIMMYT. So those type of things, if you can shed light on that. And another one, like, just to share you my example, I work people, our beneficiaries. CIMMYT has been in this region for the last 35, 40 years. We have a trusted photo. So what we do, like we have a lot of events, so we just go and take photos. So what is your advice? Like we need to alert people like this event will be recorded or will be filmed or something like that. Otherwise, photo data are the new currency these days. Okay, over to you, Gideon, and thank you, Kevin, for answer.
Well, thank you, Abdu. This is really those are really valid points. No, absolutely. Let me go start with the last one because that's a relatively easy one. Inform people that you're doing this and ask them if it's okay. Tell them why you're doing this. So if the photos are going to be posted on let's say a newsletter of CIMMYT, or the possibility is there that will happen, inform them that could happen. And if they say, "Oh, I don't want that," really identifiable. That's a way of dealing with those types of issues. The question of what donors want and what people want. The people go first, the donors second. I mean, this is very donors do have unreasonable asks. And if there is something there that they're requiring certain things which are not which are ethically not sound, then we then point them to IREC, to senior management, to the legal department in order to resolve that. I mean, and this is one issue which is really important. From the get-go, if there is something like that in a contract, then that contract should be amended to get those kind of things out. I understand that funders want to know what is happening, who is being reached, etc. But that can be done in an anonymized way as well. So providing funders with information. Let's see. Okay, in an ideal world, in 2 years' time, there should be an ODK, dedicated ODK server, one CGIAR server, which is secured, which can be used by CGIAR scientists to ensure that their data is not can be safeguarded. This is something that needs, but it isn't there. It isn't there yet. So right now, if you're collecting really sensitive information, then don't use ODK. That's very very simple. If you're collecting relatively benign information, then I wouldn't worry too much about ODK, using ODK, because the chances of that being breached are not really very high. Now, on this type of data that you have that is there, one of the things that you could do is, once you've completed the data collection, is to extract that information and delete the information there, and put the data on CIMMYT's secure human subjects research repository. If you have human subjects research data that is that contains granular geospatial information, data that contains personally identifiable information in the research repository. I'll put the the managers of that one as well, along with being chair of the committee. But this is split up, and I'm not going to put any names here because that's still a little bit in transition right now. But send an email to that email address, and they can provide you with a segment. If you want a segment now, send an email to me, and I can give you that segment. But you have to be quick, because by the end of this week, my laptop is going to travel back to Mexico, and I will not be able to. I'm not online anymore.
Thank you, Gideon. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, was there another point, Abdul? I think you had 4 points, right?
No, yeah. I mean, Gideon, I prefer like donors' requirements sometimes, particularly the project which currently I'm working in. I mean, they have their own stat. The donor want to track the beneficiary, household level beneficiaries, beneficiary-based surveys every year. We are doing that. Without those informations, so these are some of the things. Otherwise, you have really answered those points, including the photos. And thank you so much.
Because and bring it to a little bit more general level. Because this is a question that we collect, but we're not making that public. Where data that goes on Dataverse should be blurred to 1 or 2 decimal points in the derived data set that goes on Dataverse. Now, for a lot of research purposes, that's fine. I mean, knowing more or less the vicinity where something is good enough. But for some of the geospatial analysis, they need much more granular information. And the question was, well, how do we deal with this? Because we're not making that available, but people reach out to us, say we want to use that data, but we need to have much more granular information. Now, this is comparable to what you said, Abdul, about let's say a funder asking for that kind of information. In these kind of cases, the person requiring information which is not being made publicly available because of privacy concerns, what they can do is, if they have a legitimate reason for accessing that information, they can go through IREC. They can contact IREC, provide a research protocol wherein they delineate the approved, and it then goes to a we get a data sharing agreement set up between CIMMYT and that party, which stipulates how that data can be used, what needs to be done after they've used that data, when it needs to be destroyed, etc., and the verification methods on how sensitive that information is.
Thank you, Gideon. There is one question in the chat about training materials, particularly thinking about data enumerators that are often hired with very little training. Do you have some simple guidelines, training materials that can be useful in conducting research?
No, I'm sorry, I don't have that material. That's I will give that question to Aparna, so that she can that will be on her plate to discuss this with, if there is a more general need within CIMMYT for that kind of material, then it might make sense to look at whether that kind of material can be generated. But again, that takes time, so that also comes at a cost, and that needs to be costed somewhere.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Any other questions? I don't see any more in the chat. I think Gangarao's question about taking photos of farmers has been answered reasonably well, if not as well as possible. But maybe if you have another comment on taking pictures of farmers during on-farm trials and such.
Yeah, I see the question in the chat, and why you're taking those pictures. If it is okay, if you use those pictures in the technical reports, for blog posts or whatever purposes you want to use those pictures. Now, be honest, be specific with the farmers why you're taking these pictures, and if they're okay with it, and use your common sense in terms of how you use pictures and other audiovisual material. Think about, is this something that is okay, or is this something that if it happened to me, I would not be okay with it? And then, yeah, that's that. Yeah, put yourself in the place of the farmer. In many of those cases, especially if you have pictures for which you haven't talked to the farmer yet, because you didn't realize that it's something that you should have gotten prior informed consent for. And when in doubt, don't do it. Very simple.
Okay, thank you very much, Gideon. I think it's time to bring this seminar to a conclusion, but there have been lots of comments of thanks and recognition of the superb presentation in one of the comments. So thanks, Gideon, for that, and also once again for your leadership in this area. I think within CIMMYT, and ensuring that we all comply, because it's the right thing to do, as you well point out in your presentations. So thank you so much, Gideon, and let me once again remind everyone or inform everyone that maybe wasn't here at the beginning. Other duties also within CG, Aparna Das has agreed to step into the role of chairing our CIMMYT IREC, and so thanks to Aparna, and she's somebody you can contact with any questions or applications, or whether you need to make applications for ethical review of your research plans. So thank you, Aparna, for taking on contributions over the years, and thanks to everyone for joining us in this interesting seminar. Let me also, since we still have 1 minute, 2 minutes, wish everybody a happy holiday season. I hope you all find the time to rest and relax and do something other than work during the New Year's period, whatever your traditions may be. Relax and enjoy it, and come back, and we look forward to meeting you again next year. So thanks, and have a good rest of your day or evening, as the case may be. Goodbye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.